Imagine arriving in Japan for the first time. You step out of the airport expecting to see crowded streets, neon lights, ancient temples, and futuristic technology. And you do see all of those things. But then something strange happens. You notice that people are standing perfectly still on an escalator. Nobody is pushing. Nobody is shouting. Nobody is cutting in line. You enter a public restroom and discover heated seats, automatic lids, and controls that look like they belong inside a spaceship. You buy a drink from a vending machine, and there are machines selling things you never imagined could come from a vending machine. Then you ride a train moving so smoothly that you barely feel it. For tourists, Japan can feel less like visiting another country and more like stepping into a completely different operating system. Many of the things that surprise visitors aren't expensive attractions or futuristic inventions. They're ordinary parts of everyday life. Things Japanese people may barely notice because they've grown up with them. And that's what makes Japan so fascinating. Today, we're going to explore some of the most surprising things Japan does that can genuinely shock tourists. And by the end, you may realize that Japan's greatest innovation isn't technology. It's the way technology, tradition, discipline, and social behavior have been combined into everyday life. Let's begin. Number 10. Vending machines every year. In many countries, vending machines are simple. You put money into a machine, press a button, and get a snack or a drink. In Japan, vending machines are on another level. You can find them on busy city streets, near train stations, outside restaurants, in quiet neighborhoods, and sometimes in places where you wouldn't expect to see any machine at all. And the variety can be surprising. Cold drinks are obvious, but depending on where you are, vending machines can offer hot coffee, tea, soups, snacks, and other everyday products. For a tourist, the experience can feel almost futuristic. Imagine walking down a quiet street late at night. The stores are closed. There may be very few people around. But a vending machine is still glowing in the darkness, waiting for someone to make a purchase. Why are vending machines so common in Japan? Part of the answer is convenience. Japan has developed an incredibly efficient culture around small, everyday transactions. But there's another important factor: trust. A vending machine can exist in a public place because there is generally an expectation that people will use it properly. This doesn't mean Japan has no crime or social problems. It simply means the system works well enough that vending machines can become a normal part of the landscape. For tourists, that alone can be fascinating. Number 9. Restaurants can look like miniature worlds. Japanese restaurants aren't always about simply sitting down and ordering food. Sometimes the entire experience begins before you even enter. You might see incredibly detailed food displays outside a restaurant. These aren't necessarily photographs. They're often realistic plastic models designed to show customers exactly what the restaurant serves. For a foreign visitor, this can be surprisingly useful. You don't always need to understand Japanese to know what you're ordering. You can simply look at the display and point. And inside some restaurants, the experience becomes even more interesting. You may order through a vending machine. You may sit at a counter. Your food may arrive through a small opening. In some ramen restaurants, the seating can be designed to reduce distractions and focus entirely on the meal. And then there are conveyor belt sushi restaurants, where plates of food move past customers. The idea is simple. Instead of a waiter carrying every dish individually, the restaurant uses a system that allows customers to select food as it passes. What seems unusual to a tourist is simply efficiency transformed into restaurant design. Japan has a remarkable ability to take an ordinary activity and redesign the entire process around convenience. Number 8. Trains that feel almost 2Q. One of the first things many tourists notice in Japan is the transportation system, especially the trains. Japan's railway network is famous for being efficient, extensive, and highly organized. But what shocks some visitors isn't just the speed. It's the behavior inside the train. People often speak quietly. Phones are generally kept on silent. Passengers usually understand where to stand when waiting for doors to open. And when a train arrives, people don't necessarily rush toward the doors. There is a system. People form lines. They allow passengers to exit first. Then they enter. For someone coming from a place where boarding a train can feel like a competitive sport, this can be surprising. And then there's the Shinkansen. The famous Japanese bullet train can travel at extremely high speeds while providing an experience that feels remarkably smooth. But perhaps the most impressive part is the philosophy behind it. Japan doesn't treat transportation as simply moving people from point A to point B. The system is designed around precision. Timing matters. Organization matters. Passenger behavior matters. And when millions of people use the same system every day, those small behaviors add up. The result is a transportation culture that can feel almost choreographed. Number 7. People fleeing up after themselves. This might be one of the most surprising cultural differences for visitors. Japan is famous for being clean. But the interesting part is that cleanliness isn't simply created by having more cleaners. Individual responsibility plays a huge role. In schools, students can participate in cleaning their classrooms and school areas. The message is simple. You use the space, so you help take care of the space. This idea can continue into adulthood. After sporting events, Japanese fans have famously been seen collecting their own trash before leaving. And during major international events, this behavior often attracts global attention. For a tourist, it can be surprising to see thousands of people leave an event without leaving the same amount of trash behind. Of course, Japan isn't magically spotless everywhere. There are dirty streets, overflowing bins, and exceptions. But the broader cultural expectation is powerful. People are often taught from an early age that public spaces are shared spaces. And when millions of people follow that principle, the environment changes. The surprising part isn't that Japan has cleaners. It's that ordinary people often see cleanliness as partly their own responsibility. Number 6. Publici restrooms can feel like luxury. Now let's talk about something tourists don't always expect. Toilets. In Japan, bathrooms can become an attraction. A visitor may enter a restroom and suddenly find themselves facing a control panel filled with buttons, heated seats, bidet functions, adjustable water pressure, temperature controls, air drying features, automatic flushing, and sometimes even sound functions designed to provide privacy. For someone encountering this technology for the first time, the experience can be confusing. You might think, why does a toilet need this many buttons? But Japan has spent decades developing sophisticated bathroom technology around comfort, hygiene, and convenience. And what's even more surprising is that advanced toilets aren't necessarily limited to luxury hotels. You can encounter impressive restroom facilities in airports, shopping centers, train stations, restaurants, and other public places. This reflects something important about Japanese design. Technology isn't always used to create something flashy. Sometimes it's used to improve an extremely ordinary experience. The result? Something tourists may never have expected to be impressed by. A public bathroom. Number 5. Japan can be extremely polite. Japan's culture of politeness is one of the first things many visitors notice. But it's not simply about saying thank you. Politeness can be built into everyday behavior. Bowing is a familiar example. People may bow when greeting someone, expressing gratitude, apologizing, or showing respect. The depth and duration of the bow can communicate different levels of formality. And then there are small behaviors that visitors might not even notice immediately. People often avoid disturbing others in public. They may keep conversations quiet on trains. They may queue carefully. They may avoid eating while walking in certain situations. And customer service can be extremely formal and attentive. In Japanese culture, the concept of hospitality is often associated with the idea of anticipating another person's needs. This can make interactions feel very different for foreign visitors. But there's an interesting side effect. When you travel through a society where small acts of consideration are expected, you may start becoming more aware of your own behavior. You notice how loudly you're speaking, where you're standing, whether you're blocking someone, whether you're making another person's experience more difficult. And that may be one of the biggest lessons Japan unintentionally gives tourists. Politeness isn't always about being formal. Sometimes it's simply about reducing inconvenience for other people. Number 4. Convenience stores are almost too convenient. Imagine walking into a small store at midnight. You can buy food, drinks, snacks, basic household items. You may be able to withdraw cash, pay bills, print documents, send packages, and access other everyday services. Welcome to the Japanese convenience store. Known locally as konbini, Convenience stores are an important part of daily life, but what surprises tourists is the quality and variety of food. A small convenience store may offer rice balls, sandwiches, noodles, desserts, hot food, coffee, and prepared meals. And these aren't always treated as emergency food. People regularly use convenience stores as part of their normal routines. Students, office workers, travelers, families, tourists, everyone can use them. The design philosophy is simple: make everyday life easier. And once again, Japan has taken something ordinary and optimized it. The convenience store isn't just a place to buy snacks, it's a small piece of infrastructure. And for tourists, discovering how much can be accomplished inside a tiny store can be one of the unexpected highlights of visiting Japan. Number 3. Thier, ARE, places, WH Mikali, Popple take sleeping seriously. Now here's something that can confuse visitors. You may see someone sleeping on a train. At first, a tourist might think, why aren't they worried? But sleeping in public can be viewed differently in Japan than in many other places. You may see commuters sleeping during train journeys, students resting between activities, office workers taking short naps. There is even a cultural concept known as inamori, often translated roughly as being present while asleep. The idea is complicated and doesn't mean that sleeping anywhere is automatically acceptable, but it reflects a broader relationship between work, exhaustion, responsibility, and public space. A person who falls asleep on a train may still be perceived as someone who is participating in society, rather than simply being irresponsible. Of course, context matters, and tourists shouldn't assume that sleeping anywhere is appropriate. But seeing commuters peacefully sleeping while surrounded by strangers can definitely be surprising, especially when the train continues moving through one of the world's busiest cities. Number 2. Japan has a Unakra relationship wheat tradition and technology. This might be the most fascinating thing about Japan, because Japan doesn't always choose between the old and the new. Sometimes it keeps both. You can walk through a city filled with enormous digital screens and high-tech stores. Turn a corner, and suddenly find yourself standing in front of a centuries-old temple. A few minutes later, you could be riding a high-speed train, then eating traditional Japanese food, then entering a futuristic shopping district. This contrast can feel surreal. In some countries, modernization means replacing old traditions, but Japan often finds ways to place modern life alongside historical traditions. Traditional architecture exists beside skyscrapers. Ancient festivals continue in modern cities. Traditional crafts coexist with advanced manufacturing. People can wear modern clothing every day and still participate in traditional ceremonies. And perhaps that's why Japan feels so unique to visitors. The country isn't simply futuristic, and it isn't simply traditional. It's both. At the same time. Number 1. Japan turns ordinary life into a SY STEM. And now we reach the biggest reason Japan can shock tourists. It's not one invention. It's not one food. It's not one unusual custom. It's the way Japan organizes everyday life. Consider everything we've talked about: vending machines, trains, convenience stores, public cleanliness, restaurant design, restrooms, queuing, politeness, technology, tradition. None of these things individually explains Japan, but together, they create a very different experience. Japan often takes ordinary problems and builds systems around them. How do you move millions of people efficiently? Build an organized railway network. How do you keep public spaces usable? Teach people that they share responsibility for them. How do you make restaurants faster? Redesign the ordering and seating process. How do you make daily life more convenient? Put essential services into neighborhood convenience stores. How do you improve comfort? Apply technology to things as ordinary as toilets. And this is where Japan becomes fascinating. The country's greatest innovation may not be a robot, a bullet train, or a futuristic gadget. It may be the ability to turn small improvements into a culture. The Japanese idea of small details. There's a word often associated with Japanese aesthetics and craftsmanship: attention to detail. And you can see it everywhere. A train conductor may perform precise gestures as part of a safety procedure. A restaurant may carefully arrange food on a plate. A store employee may package an item with remarkable care. A hotel may provide small amenities you didn't expect. A traditional craftsman may spend years mastering a single technique. These details may seem unnecessary from the outside, but they communicate something. The experience matters. The process matters. The customer matters. The object matters. And perhaps that's why tourists often return from Japan talking about small moments rather than famous landmarks. They remember the train, the vending machine, the quiet street, the convenience store meal, the incredibly clean bathroom, the perfectly organized queue, the stranger who helped them find the correct train. The tiny details become the memories. Japan essent perfect. But there's an important point to remember. Japan isn't a fantasy world. It's not perfect. The country has its own social challenges, economic pressures, demographic problems, work-related issues, and cultural debates. Not every Japanese person behaves exactly the same way. Not every city is spotless. Not every train arrives perfectly on time. And not every tourist will have the same experience. The purpose of these examples isn't to say that Japan is better than every other country. It's to show how differently a society can organize everyday life. And that's what makes travel so valuable. You don't just see another country, you see another possibility, another way of solving problems, another way of interacting with strangers, another way of designing cities, another way of thinking about public space. Final touched. So, the next time you see a video about Japan, don't just look at the skyscrapers. Look at the small details. Watch how people wait for a train. Look at how food is packaged. Notice how public spaces are treated. Look at the technology inside ordinary places. Pay attention to how old traditions exist alongside modern life, because that's where Japan becomes truly fascinating. For many tourists, the biggest shock isn't that Japan has futuristic technology. It's that the futuristic experience often appears in places where you least expect it. A train station, a restaurant, a convenience store, a bathroom, a vending machine, a quiet neighborhood. Japan has created a society where extraordinary things can become ordinary, and perhaps that's the real secret. The future doesn't always arrive as a flying car or a robot walking down the street. Sometimes the future looks like a vending machine that works perfectly at midnight. Sometimes it looks like a train that arrives exactly when expected. Sometimes it looks like thousands of people quietly waiting in line. Sometimes it looks like a public bathroom that feels like a luxury hotel. And sometimes, the most advanced thing in the room isn't technology at all. It's human behavior. Japan reminds us that a country doesn't need to completely reinvent life to feel futuristic. Sometimes, you just need to make millions of tiny things work a little better. And when those tiny improvements become part of everyday culture, the entire country can feel different. That's what makes Japan one of the most fascinating places for a curious traveler. Not because everything is strange, but because so many ordinary things are done in extraordinary ways. And once you notice them, you start looking at everyday life differently. Because the real surprise isn't simply what Japan does, it's how normal all of it feels to the people who live there. And that's exactly what makes it so shocking to everyone visiting for the first time. Thanks for watching.